The morning Adrienne Voss walked into the burned-out shell of her company's Chicago office and found a stranger sitting calmly at her desk, drinking her coffee, she almost called security. Then she noticed the child asleep on the leather couch behind him. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, curled around a battered stuffed dog like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. One sock on, one sock off. She didn't call security. That was 3 weeks before the night she stood in the rain outside a federal building in downtown Chicago, her wedding ring cutting into her finger, watching people she'd trusted get led away in handcuffs. 3 weeks before she understood that the stranger at her desk wasn't just a man who'd wandered in off the street. He was the reason she was still alive to watch it happen. But she's getting ahead of herself. Let me take you back to where this actually started. 6 weeks earlier, Adrienne Voss was the kind of woman who got described as formidable in profiles she hadn't asked for and didn't particularly enjoy. 41 years old. Founder and CEO of Voss Capital Partners, a mid-sized private equity firm that had survived 2 recessions and one very public scandal involving a former partner she'd trusted too much. Brown hair she kept short because she didn't have time for anything that required maintenance. A corner office on the 32nd floor of a building she partially owned. A reputation for being the sharpest read in any room she walked into. What the profiles didn't mention, the studio apartment she'd moved into after her divorce, smaller than her first office. The way she ate dinner standing over the kitchen sink most nights, because sitting down alone at a table felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. The stack of unanswered letters from her mother's assisted living facility, because looking at the numbers meant facing numbers she couldn't cover without liquidating assets she needed to keep the firm solvent. She was surviving. She was very good at surviving. She just wasn't sure, some mornings, what exactly she was surviving for. The meeting request came from her board chair, Franklin, who scheduled things at 7 a.m. because he believed early hours sorted the serious from the pretenders. Adrienne arrived at 6:55. The conference room already had 3 people in it she didn't recognize. Adrienne. Franklin stood. He had the particular posture of a man delivering news he'd rehearsed. Thank you for coming in early. I want you to meet some associates of mine. The associates didn't give last names. The woman, mid-50s, silver hair, pulled back with the kind of severity that suggested military background, introduced herself only as Constance. The 2 men flanking her said nothing at all. We have a proposal, Constance said, that we believe serves your firm's interests and ours. Adrienne sat down, crossed her arms, and waited. The proposal was this. There was a man named Declan Shaw. He was a general contractor, owner of a small construction company out of Bridgeport, a neighborhood on the south side that developers kept eyeing and then ignoring because the community pushed back hard. Shaw had a 5-year-old son named Henry. Shaw had no criminal record, no social media presence worth mentioning, and no connections to any of the families or networks that orbited Adrienne's world. What Shaw did have, apparently, was something Constance's associates needed him to appear to have. Specifically, they needed him to appear to be the kind of man who was married to someone like Adrienne Voss. Why? Adrienne asked. Constance exchanged a look with one of the silent men. Mr. Shaw is involved in a situation that requires certain optics. His position becomes significantly more credible and significantly safer if he appears to be connected to someone with your profile. Safer, Adrienne repeated. There are people who would like to discredit him, or worse. A contract marriage to a known figure in your industry provides a layer of insulation. You're asking me to marry a contractor from Bridgeport for 18 months, after which you divorce quietly. You receive a fee structure we've outlined in the packet in front of you. Constance nodded at the folder on the table that Adrienne hadn't touched yet. Additionally, we can arrange an infusion of capital into Voss Capital that would stabilize your firm's current debt situation and fund the expansion into the southeast market you've been trying to finance for 2 years. Adrienne looked at the folder. She didn't open it. And my mother's facility. Constance didn't blink. Covered. Full care, indefinitely. It was the indefinitely that did it, not the money for the firm, not the capital injection. The word indefinitely, meaning her mother would never again have a letter in a stack that Adrienne couldn't bring herself to open. I want to meet him first, she said. The Shaw construction yard was exactly what it sounded like. Chain link fence, a lot of organized equipment that suggested someone ran a tight operation, the smell of sawdust and diesel, a hand-painted sign over the gate. Not the kind of place Adrienne usually spent her Tuesday mornings. Declan Shaw was underneath a truck when she arrived. She knew it was him because the man who'd been watching the gate pointed at 2 boots sticking out from under a white work truck, like something from a cartoon. Shaw, the gate man called. You got a visitor. A pause. Then the boots moved and Declan Shaw slid out from under the truck on a creeper board and stood up in one motion that was more graceful than it had any right to be. He was taller than she'd expected. Work-worn jeans, a flannel with the sleeves rolled up, hands that would take a week to fully clean, dark hair going silver at the temples. He looked at her the way she'd seen construction workers look at architectural plans, assessing, practical, not impressed or unimpressed, just processing. Adrienne Voss, he said. His voice was quieter than she'd expected, too. The kind of quiet that meant he didn't use it unless he needed to. That's me. She stepped into the yard. I wanted to meet you before I signed anything. He wiped his hands on a rag. They told me you might say that. What else did they tell you? That you're smart enough to be useful and practical enough not to ask too many questions. He said it without cruelty, just flat assessment. I'm guessing you're here to prove that second part wrong. I'm here because I don't sign contracts for people I haven't looked in the eye. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, more like a recalibration. Fair enough. You want coffee? I've got a thermos that's better than it looks. They stood in the yard drinking coffee from mismatched cups while the morning crew moved around them. She asked the questions she needed to ask. He answered most of them, not all of them. What are you involved in? She asked finally. What's the actual situation? He looked at his cup. Something I found out about and couldn't unfind. That's not an answer. I know. He met her eyes. His were gray, not particularly warm, but steady. It's the only one I can give you right now. What I can tell you is that I'm not dangerous to you. I'm not going to bring anything into your life that wasn't already there. And your son? Declan's whole body changed. The steadiness was still there, but something underneath it went sharp and protective, like watching someone move in front of something they intended to shield. Henry is 5, he said. His mother passed 18 months ago. He doesn't need someone coming into his life and treating him like a prop. I wasn't going to treat him like a prop. Most people would. Either ignore him or overcorrect and try to be something they're not. Adrienne thought about her own childhood. A mother who worked double shifts and a father who'd been an absence so consistent it eventually became just the wallpaper of her life. She knew what it felt like to be a kid reading adult arrangements that were never fully explained. If I'm going to be in his house, she said, I'm going to be present. I'm not going to pretend he doesn't exist or perform warmth I don't feel, but I also won't disappear on him without warning. If this ends in 18 months, I'll handle that in a way that doesn't leave him thinking he did something wrong. Declan studied her for a long moment. You've thought about this. I think about everything. He nodded slowly. You should meet him before you decide. Henry Shaw was at the job site office, which was really just a trailer with a coffee maker and too many blueprints, sitting at the table with crayons and a serious expression drawing what appeared to be a very large dog fighting some kind of monster. He had his father's gray eyes and a gap in his front teeth and the focused intensity of a child who had learned that concentration was its own kind of comfort. He looked up when they came in, assessed Adrienne with the same directness his father had, and said, Do you like dogs? I do, she said, which was true. She'd had a dog in her 30s and still missed it. Rufus is my dog. He held up the stuffed animal from the chair beside him, a dog so worn its original color was anyone's guess. He goes everywhere. Smart dog, Adrienne said, covering all the territory. Henry looked at her like she'd said something unexpectedly sensible. Yeah, he said. Exactly. She signed the contract 4 days later. The terms were straightforward. They would live together, present as a married couple at required events, maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. Henry would be part of the household. After 18 months, a quiet divorce, and she kept everything she'd been promised. The civil ceremony was on a Thursday morning. A judge who looked like she'd married approximately 1,000 couples and had feelings about none of them. No guests except the required witnesses. Declan wore a jacket over a clean shirt. Adrienne wore the gray suit she kept for presentations that needed to read as serious but not aggressive. No kiss. They'd agreed on that. The drive to the apartment was quiet. She'd expected something in Bridgeport, somewhere that fit the Contractor cover story. Instead, the car service took them to a building in Lincoln Park with actual doormen and a lobby that smelled like money. This doesn't look like a contractor's apartment, she said. No, Declan agreed. It doesn't. The apartment was on the 14th floor. Neat in the way that suggested someone had strong opinions about where things belonged. Henry's corner of the living room was the only deviation, blocks and picture books, and the stuffed dog's accessories spread across a rug in an organized chaos that was clearly its own system. The second bedroom is yours, Declan said, carrying her bag down the hall. Full bathroom attached. Office if you need it. I'm at the end of the hall. Henry's room is across from yours. This is not contractor money, she said again. No, he set her bag on the bed. It's not. You're going to tell me at some point, probably. He looked at her with those steady gray eyes. But not tonight. Tonight I need to get Henry dinner and run through his reading homework, and you look like you need about 12 hours of sleep. She wanted to push. She was built for pushing. But there was something in the honest fatigue in his face that made her stand down. Just for tonight. In the morning, over coffee she found already made, and a note on the counter in Declan's handwriting. Henry likes his eggs scrambled, not runny. He'll tell you they're wrong if the cheese isn't melted through. She started to understand that this arrangement had already started becoming something more complicated than the contract suggested. The firm kept her busy. It always had. She went in that first Monday and threw herself into the work like it was a tide she could swim against, and mostly it kept her head above water. 3 weeks in, she understood the landscape well enough to see what was happening. There was a deal she'd been assembling for 8 months. A consortium of investors interested in a Southside development project, the kind of project that actually benefited the communities it touched rather than just displacing them, which was rarer than it should have been. Someone was undermining it, quietly, methodically, spreading doubt through back channels. The kind of thing you couldn't prove in a meeting but could feel like weather shifting. She came home that night distracted and found Declan at the kitchen table, helping Henry with what appeared to be a deeply contentious math worksheet. "The answer's 4, Henry said. "How do you know?" "Because I counted." "Show me how you counted, Dad, show me." Henry showed him, with the exasperated precision of a child who is correct and knows it. Declan listened to the whole explanation, checked it and said, "You're right, I know." Adrienne sat down at the table. "Someone's killing my Southside deal," she said, because Declan had looked up at her in a way that asked without words how her day had gone. "Who? I don't know yet. It's coming through back channels, reputation stuff, nothing I can trace directly." Declan was quiet for a moment. Then, the Barrett Group. She looked at him. "What? If your deal touches the South Side, specifically if it involves any of the parcels along the river corridor, the Barrett Group will try to kill it. They've been sitting on those parcels for 6 years waiting for the right moment to flip them for maximum profit. A community benefit development cuts their play in half. How do you know that?" He glanced at Henry, who was carefully erasing something on his worksheet. "Because I grew up in Bridgeport, and I've been watching them work for a long time." She stared at him. "Declan, not tonight," he said quietly. "Let me get him to bed, then we can talk." After Henry was asleep, a process involving 2 chapters of a book about a dog who solves mysteries, which Henry found extremely relevant to his interests. Declan came to find her in the kitchen. She'd made tea she wasn't drinking. He pulled out his phone, pulled up a document, and set it on the table between them. It was a financial analysis. Precise, sophisticated, the kind of thing that took genuine expertise to construct. It laid out the Barrett Group's land acquisition strategy over the past decade with the clarity of someone who hadn't just read about it, but had watched it happen from the inside. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "I built it," he said, "over about 4 years." She looked at him across the table. "You're not just a contractor. I'm absolutely a contractor. I also have an MBA from Wharton and spent 8 years at a private infrastructure fund before I came back to Bridgeport to build something that actually meant something to the neighborhood I grew up in." He said it without performance, just facts. The fund is what connected me to the Barrett Group, and to what they were doing, and to why I needed to become very difficult to find. Adrienne set her mug down slowly. "Someone came after you. Someone tried." His voice went flat in a way she was starting to recognize. "They didn't come after me directly. They came after my wife." A pause. "She died in a car accident 14 months ago that wasn't an accident." The kitchen was very quiet. "Henry's mother," Adrienne said. "Her name was Meg." He looked at his hands. "She was smarter than me and braver than me, and she believed that the right thing to do was always obvious, which I admired and also found occasionally exhausting." Something that might have been grief and might have been love moved across his face. "She's the one who said we had to go to the authorities. She was right, I just wasn't fast enough." Adrienne thought about the little boy asleep down the hall, the worn stuffed dog, the gap-toothed serious face. Why the cover? Why the contractor story in the quiet apartment? Because the people connected to the Barrett Group have reach. If they know I'm still building a case, still talking to investigators, they'll move. And if they know I have a target on me, anyone close to me becomes a secondary target. He met her eyes. "The marriage gives me a different kind of visibility. They're watching for a threat. They're not watching for a mid-level contractor with a boring domestic life. And I'm the boring domestic life." "You're the armor," he said. "That's what Constance's people thought, anyway." "And what do you think?" He looked at her for a long moment. I think you're considerably more than that. I just don't know yet what to do with that information. She went to bed that night thinking about Meg, who had believed the right thing was always obvious, about Henry with his stuffed dog and his gap-toothed certainty, about the deal she'd been building for 8 months and the people trying to quietly kill it. She thought about the fact that Declan's cover story and her cover story had become the same story, and whether that meant anything, and decided it was too late and she was too tired to have that thought productively. The deal crisis came on a Wednesday. Her managing director, James, knocked on her office door at 8:15 with a look she'd learned to read as controlled alarm. Meridian Bancorp pulled out, he said. An hour ago. No explanation given. 40% of her consortium's financing, gone. She had 2 hours before this became public, and the rest of the investors started making nervous phone calls. She called Declan from the elevator. Meridian Bancorp, she said. Barrett connected? Meridian's board chair plays golf with Raymond Barrett every other Thursday. His voice was calm. They're leveraging the financing to stall you. If the deal falls apart, the parcels stay with Barrett, and in 18 months, when the market shifts the way it's going to, he sells it triple. Can I prove that? Not yet. But I have a contact at Meridian, someone who's been uncomfortable with Barrett's reach for about 2 years. If you want to make a direct approach, set it up. There was a pause. Adrienne, these are people I've been cultivating carefully. If you move too fast, I know how to move, she said. Set it up, and trust me to read the room when I get there. Another pause, shorter. Okay. The meetings over the next week were some of the most delicate she'd ever run. The contact at Meridian turned out to be a deputy CFO named Louise, who had the particular look of someone who had been waiting for permission to say something out loud. Adrienne gave her that permission by being direct, without being threatening, and Louise gave her documentation that wasn't quite actionable, but was close enough to make Meridian's board chair very uncomfortable when Adrienne placed a single call, laying out what she knew and what she would be compelled to share if the withdrawal wasn't reversed. Meridian came back to the table within 48 hours. That night, she came home to find Declan making chili and Henry at the kitchen table with Rufus positioned on the chair beside him, clearly attending the homework session in an official capacity. You fixed it, Declan said. Not a question. Mostly. What's mostly? Barrett knows someone pushed back. He'll escalate. Declan was quiet for a moment, stirring the pot with the particular focus she'd come to recognize as his thinking look. He will, he said, and when he does, I'll be ready for it. We'll be ready, she said without thinking about it. He looked at her over his shoulder. She held the look. We'll be ready, he agreed. The Barrett Group's next move came from a direction she hadn't anticipated. Not against her deal, but against her directly. A story placed in a financial newsletter suggesting that Voss Capital's recent moves had been enabled by undisclosed access to insider information. Nothing provable, everything damaging. She was standing on the sidewalk outside her office at 7 a.m. reading it on her phone when Declan called. I saw it, he said. Barrett, through 2 layers of cutout, but yes. How do we respond? We don't respond to the story. We make the story irrelevant. His voice was focused, precise. The voice she'd come to understand of someone who had been thinking 10 steps ahead since before most people woke up. There's a press opportunity on the South Side development in 2 weeks. Public announcement, community stakeholders, media. If you're standing in front of that project with your name on it, looking like someone who built something real, a planted story in a newsletter becomes noise. That requires accelerating the timeline. Yes. Can we? I know every contractor on that project, he said. I know which subs can move. I know where the delays are and how to fix them. And I know the community board chair personally. I grew up 3 blocks from her. A pause. This is what I do, Adrienne, not the Wharton part. This part. Let me actually help. She stood on the sidewalk in the early morning cold and thought about what it would cost to trust that. Okay, she said. Let's do it. The 2 weeks that followed were the most she'd worked since the year she founded the firm. Declan worked alongside her without ever once making her feel like she was being managed or redirected. He knew things she didn't know. She knew things he didn't know. They built around each other's gaps with the efficiency of people who had stopped needing to prove themselves to each other somewhere around day 4. Henry, for his part, had opinions about all of it, mostly expressed at dinner, where he'd taken to giving them daily status reports on whatever he'd observed that day. The status reports ranged from updates on Rufus's strategic positioning to assessments of which of his teachers was fair versus not fair versus pretty fair, actually. One evening, Adrienne was helping him with a school project, a poster about what community meant, and he looked up from his glitter glue with sudden seriousness. Is our family real? He asked. She put down the scissors. What do you mean, real? Some kids at school have stepfamilies, and those are real. Is ours like that? She thought about what Declan had said about Henry being 5 years old and not needing pretend. She thought about Meg, who believed the right thing was always obvious. I don't know exactly what to call it yet, she said honestly, but I know I'm not pretending to care about you. That part's real. Henry considered this with the gravity of a small judge. Okay, he said, that's enough for now. He went back to the glitter glue. Adrienne went back to cutting stars and didn't look up until she was sure her face was back under control. Later, she told Declan what Henry had said. They were in the kitchen after Henry's bedtime, the apartment quiet around them. Declan was quiet for a moment. He asked questions like that, he said, like he's running diagnostics. He's smart, too smart for what we're doing. He looked at her. The kitchen light made his face look older, or maybe more honest. I knew this would be complicated, the arrangement. I didn't fully account for. He stopped. For what? For the fact that he would like you, and that I'd. He stopped again. Adrienne waited. That I'd find it harder than I expected, he said finally. To remember, this has an expiration date. The statement sat in the kitchen between them for a moment. I've been having a similar problem, she said. Neither of them said anything else, but neither of them moved to end the conversation either. They stood in the quiet kitchen of this apartment that had started to feel like something, until Declan said goodnight, and she said goodnight, and they both went to their separate ends of the hall, and that was that. Except it wasn't. The morning the Barrett group made its final move, Adrienne woke at 5:30 to her phone ringing. Unknown number. Mrs. Voss. The voice was male pleasant in the particular way of people who didn't need to be threatening because they simply were. My name is Raymond Barrett. I think it's time we spoke directly. She sat up in the dark. I'd agree. You've been building something in my city that I have significant concerns about. I'd like to discuss how those concerns might be addressed. By which you mean you'd like me to walk away from the South Side project. I mean, I'd like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. You're a businesswoman. I respect that. A pause. Your husband, on the other hand, is a problem I've been meaning to address for some time. Declan Shaw has some information that belongs to me, and his current domestic situation is making it difficult to access. Her blood went cold. She kept her voice completely level. I'm not sure what my husband has to do with a business conversation. I think you know exactly what he has to do with it. Bring him to a meeting tonight, both of you, Meridian Club at 7. We'll discuss the information, the project, all of it. Or I start pulling threads that will unravel things for both of you in ways you won't enjoy. The call ended. She was down the hall and knocking on Declan's door before she'd fully processed what she was going to say. He answered immediately, which meant he hadn't been asleep either. Barrett called me, she said. He wants a meeting tonight, both of us. Something changed in his face, not fear. Closer to the expression of a man who'd been waiting for a particular moment and had just been told it arrived. He's making a direct play. He wants whatever information you have. He wants to know who else I've talked to and whether it's too late to contain it. Declan stepped back to let her into the room. It was sparse, functional, like the rest of him. This is actually good. This is actually terrifying. Both things can be true. He sat on the edge of the bed, ran a hand through his hair. If Barrett's moving into the open, it means he's nervous. He's watching us operate, and he's not sure how much I've shared or with whom. The meeting is a fishing expedition. What do? We go. He looked at her steadily. But we go ready. I've been working with a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office for 6 months. The documentation I have is almost enough. If Barrett confirms certain things tonight, if he says the right things in the right way, you're going to wire the meeting. I've had Constance's people watching Barrett's movements for 2 weeks. We've been preparing for exactly this. He paused. I was going to tell you sooner. I should have. She looked at him. You were protecting me. I was controlling the information to manage your risk, which isn't the same as protecting you. Or it is, but it wasn't fair. He held her gaze. I should have trusted you with all of it from the beginning. You barely knew me. I know you now. The words sat in the air between them, simple and specific. We go tonight, she said, together, and after it's over, you tell me everything, all of it. After it's over, he agreed. The Meridian Club was old Chicago money, dark wood and oil paintings, and the specific silence of a room where people had made serious decisions for 100 years. Raymond Barrett was shorter than she'd expected. 60s, silver-haired, the kind of face that had learned to look reasonable because reasonable men got further than visible ones. Mrs. Voss, he said. Mr. Shaw, I appreciate you coming. You didn't leave us a lot of choice, Adrienne said. They sat. Barrett poured water he didn't drink. He talked in the measured cadences of someone who was used to rooms where everything said could be denied later. He was careful, but not careful enough. What he didn't know, Declan's contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office had spent 2 months building a parallel record. What Barrett said tonight wasn't the evidence. It was the confirmation that the evidence pointed in the right direction. What he also didn't know, the documentation Declan had been quietly assembling for 4 years, everything Barrett had done to contain anyone who got too close to his land strategy, was already in the right hands, had been for 3 days. When Barrett said, the accident that took Meg Shaw, that was unfortunate, but these things have a way of resolving themselves when people make poor decisions about what to pursue. Declan didn't flinch. His hands on the table were completely still. Adrienne put her hand over his, not performance. Just the instinct of someone next to another person absorbing something terrible and not looking away from it. Barrett noticed. Something in his expression shifted slightly. He'd been reading this as a negotiation. He was starting to read it differently. I think, Declan said quietly, that you've just said more than you meant to. His phone was already vibrating with a message from the U.S. Attorney's contact. The federal agents arrived 12 minutes later. Afterward, standing on the sidewalk in the October cold, watching figures in suits move in and out of the Meridian Club's revolving doors, Adrienne realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the release of something she'd been holding tightly for weeks without fully acknowledging she was holding it. Declan stood beside her. After a moment, he took her hand, not like he'd calculated it, like he just did it. It's not completely over, he said. There are others connected to Barrett. This takes time. I know, the South Side Project. He paused. It can move forward. Barrett's leverage is gone. I know that too. They stood there for a moment in the cold, watching the city move around them, full of people who'd had ordinary evenings with no idea what had just happened in a room full of old wood and oil paintings. Henry's at Rose's, he said. We should go get him. Yeah, she said. We should. They drove across the city to pick up a 5-year-old who was very annoyed to have been woken up and very relieved to see both of them, and who fell back asleep in his car seat, with Rufus tucked under his arm before they'd made it 3 blocks. In the quiet of the car, Declan said, What happens now for the project? We proceed. I meant for us. She looked at him in the dark of the car, this man who'd turned out to be so many things she hadn't accounted for when she'd signed a document in a conference room that smelled like recycled air and careful decisions. The contract expires in 11 months, she said. I know. We could renegotiate the terms. He was quiet. What kind of terms? The kind without an expiration date. She kept her voice even because evenness was a habit she had, but she felt the words as she said them in a way she didn't usually feel words. The permanent kind, if you want. Declan didn't answer right away. He looked at the road. He looked at Henry sleeping in the rearview mirror. He looked at her. I want, he said. I have wanted that for a while. I just didn't think it was a fair thing to ask for. You're not asking, I'm offering. There's still risk, he said. Barrett's people, the fallout, it'll be months before I know we're fully clear. There's always risk, she said. I'm a private equity CEO. I assess risk for a living. She paused. You're a good investment. Something happened to his face. It took a second for her to recognize it because she hadn't seen it before, not quite like that. He laughed. Short, surprised, genuinely warm. That's the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, he said. I'm not a very romantic person, I've noticed. But he was still smiling. I find it refreshing, actually. Henry made a sound in the back seat, half a word and then a sigh, settling deeper into sleep. Rufus shifted position. He's going to need stability, Declan said. After everything this year, he needs to know what's permanent. Then we make it permanent, she said. And we tell him in a way that a 5-year-old can understand. He'll want to know if there's going to be a dog. What? He's been asking about getting a real dog. He's been using it as a test case. If things are stable enough for a dog, things are stable enough. Adrienne looked at the stuffed animal tucked under Henry's arm in the back seat. We can get a dog, they told Henry the next morning. Declan sat with him on the couch and used the words that made sense to a 5-year-old. That Adrienne was going to stay, that this was their family now. That family didn't only mean the people you were born with. Sometimes it was the people who chose you. Henry listened to all of this with his characteristic gravity. Then he looked at Adrienne. Does this mean you're my stepmom? He asked. If that's what you want to call it, she said. He thought about it. Or I could just call you Adrienne. That also works. Okay. He slid off the couch and picked up Rufus and headed toward his room, apparently satisfied. At the doorway, he turned back. Can we get a dog now? We're working on it, Declan said. Okay. And he was gone. Adrienne looked at Declan. He looked at her. The kind of look that had no name but meant something anyway. The Southside Project broke ground on a Thursday morning in November. Adrienne stood in front of a building foundation with a hard hat and a shovel and a knot of community stakeholders and journalists, and she said the things she'd prepared to say about investment and opportunity and what it meant to build something that lasted. What she hadn't prepared to say, and said anyway, was that she'd spent a long time understanding success as something you earned by yourself or not at all. That she'd confused self-sufficiency with strength. That somewhere in the past few months she'd learned the difference, and that the difference had changed things for her in ways she was still measuring. A journalist asked her afterward what had changed. She thought about a little boy with a stuffed dog and an assignment about community that had turned into a poster covered in glitter stars. She thought about a man who built things with his hands and rebuilt things with his mind and had spent 4 years trying to do the right thing because his wife had believed it was always obvious what the right thing was. I found out I'd been investing in the wrong things, she said. Good returns, but low value. I renegotiated. She got home before Henry's school bus. Declan was already there, starting dinner, the apartment smelling like garlic and something warm. How'd it go? He asked. Good, she said. Really good. Henry came in 20 minutes later, reported that Rufus had accompanied him in his backpack and had a fine day, and asked whether dinner would be ready before or after his show. Declan said before, and Henry expressed his views on this timeline clearly and then went to set the table without being asked, because someone had taught him that helping was just what you did. Later that night, after Henry was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Adrienne stood on the balcony looking out at Chicago spread below them, the lake a dark edge in the distance. Declan came out and stood beside her. Henry asked me today if we were going to get married again, he said. A real one. He's seen pictures of weddings and feels we're missing out on cake. Adrienne smiled. He has priorities, very clear ones. Declan looked out at the city. I told him we were already married and asked if that counted. He said it depended on the cake situation. We can do something small, she said. Something real. With cake, he'll want Rufus included in some capacity. Rufus can be the ring bearer. Declan laughed, and it was the same surprised warm laugh from the car that night, like joy catching him off guard. She was starting to think that was her favorite thing, that particular laugh, the way it arrived before he expected it. You know, he said, when I agreed to this arrangement, I thought I was solving a problem. Providing cover, getting stability for Henry, protecting what I'd spent 4 years building, and it turns out I was also doing something I didn't know I needed to do. He looked at her, letting someone in. Which I was significantly better at in theory than in practice until recently. You got better. You're patient. I'm not remotely patient, she said. I just understand that some things take the time they take. He took her hand in the dark, the way he had on the sidewalk outside the Meridian Club, without calculation. I chose this, he said. I want you to know that. Not the contract. This. You. She'd spent most of her adult life making sure she never needed anyone to say something like that. She'd built an entire architecture of self-sufficiency around the place where that need would have been, and she'd been pretty proud of the structure. Standing there with his hand in hers, she thought the structure might have been the thing keeping the light out. I chose this too, she said. You should know that. Below them, the city moved in its 10 million ways, people making their ordinary evenings, finding their ways home or away from home or somewhere in between. And up here, in an apartment that had started as a performance and become a life, a woman who had learned to measure everything except what mattered most was finally doing the accounting differently. The numbers came out better this way. Harder to quantify, impossible to audit, and worth every risk. She kept her hand in his and watched the city, and for the first time in a long time, the silence around her felt full instead of empty.